Kajiado North constituency, Kajiado County. They are sitting in the public gallery and they are welcomed for our proceedings this afternoon. Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for this chance to contribute to this motion. And it's timely and it's important for us to think about zoning of land, and especially for various uses. And there are various categories of zoning, Honorable Speaker, that I may wish to address. One is in terms of ownership, but the second layer is in terms of use. In terms of ownership, it is important for us to be very clear-minded on what is private land, what is public land, and also what is community land. Honorable Speaker, I have seen also that we need a lot of efficiency when we dezone or when we reallocate the zoning, and especially in terms of ownership. When we intend to do development projects in Kenya, Honorable Speaker, development projects are only done on public land because we are investing public resources. But we have seen the previous owners of this land agonizing all the time when it comes to compensation of that land, Honorable Speaker. And it is important for us to be very forthright in having regulations that also protect private property. And Honorable Speaker, what ought to happen is that when there is a public development, whether it's a dam or a road or any other kind of development, Honorable Speaker, the regulation should be that there should not be construction before the ownership changes. And ownership changes when there is a transaction, Honorable Speaker. And a transaction happens when there is change of money and resources. Because I have seen many, countless families in Kenya who surrendered their private land, but they are yet to be compensated, yet the public facility or public development that was to happen already happened. And therefore they move from office to office looking for this compensation. We need to be forthright and clear-minded in also safeguarding the sanctity of private ownership of property, Honorable Speaker, and especially when it comes to government taking up those properties. The other thing, Honorable Speaker, is in terms of use. And use can be in many ways. It can be in terms of industrialization, industrial zones. It could be in terms of development that is residential, commercial. It could also be in terms of agriculture, Honorable Speaker. And in that respect, I believe in terms of the zoning of this land, what we have in mind, Honorable Speaker, is especially agriculture. But Honorable Speaker, it is important for us as this House to constantly also be aware of the level at which agriculture should be involved in our economy. Honorable Speaker, all the time when we are doing policy, we are very keen to exalt primary production and especially agriculture, simply because many times policymakers are also elected by the people and they are politicians, and therefore we try to appeal where the majority of the people are. But Honorable Speaker, it does not necessarily mean that agriculture and primary production is necessarily the best thing for an economy. Honorable Speaker, actually, when you are defining a developed country would be like the OECD countries, Honorable Speaker, like the US, the UK, most of the Europe countries, and currently, of course, having Asia in it, Honorable Speaker. When you give all the definitions in terms of GDP per capita, GDP, and all the rest, one other definition of a developed country is a country where agriculture constitutes less than 10% of the GDP, not more. And therefore, if we seek to be a developed country, we must not be very happy when you are submitting in this House how agriculture accounts for 18% of our GDP, because it means we have a lot of catching up to do. A country like the US, Honorable Speaker, even with the large-scale farming that happens there, agriculture accounts for less than 4% of the US economy. China, which is now growing, Honorable Speaker, agriculture accounts for 7 to 8% of their GDP. More interestingly, Honorable Speaker, a country like Germany, their the involvement of agriculture to GDP is 0.97%. And Honorable Speaker, it is actually below 1% in many of those OECD countries. And therefore, it calls us on one thing also to reflect. Why is that so? Why should agriculture not account for 10% of the GDP in a developed country? It is because many times also we confuse agriculture and farming. Honorable Speaker, agriculture is a chain. It is a chain that starts from farming. What we do mostly here is actually farming. And then we call it agriculture. Because the value chain across agriculture, farming alone accounts for around a quarter, 25% only. The other thing, Honorable Speaker, that we have to be aware of is productivity. The reason why many countries promote manufacturing and they also promote tertiary production, and especially in regards to technology, is in terms of what we call productivity per worker. If you measure a GDP productivity per worker in Kenya, Honorable Speaker, and you compare the same to a person in China and a person in the US, then you see why countries grow faster when they ascend from primary production to the other two kinds of production, and especially when they shed off primary production, where agriculture is domiciled, not to have an oversized involvement in the GDP, Honorable Speaker. And I was talking about productivity. In Kenya, we say agriculture is the dominant thing that we do. But why is it that a sector that is employing over 70% of the rural population, how comes it only contributes less than 18% of our GDP? Then it shows that a very small fraction of the GDP carries a huge size of our population. Meaning, if you prorate that, it shows that productivity in agriculture is very low. Because again, agriculture in Kenya, Honorable Speaker, is also not mechanized. So what we are calling agriculture is also subsistence, Honorable Speaker. And therefore, we need to do much more. If we need agriculture to be something that is helping our economy, one thing we have to do, number one, is to mechanize. But number two is not to stop at agriculture. Is to look at the synergies, is to look at agriculture value addition and manufacturing value addition, so that there is a blend, Honorable Speaker, and there is a communication in terms of this side of the economy communicates to the other. Honorable Speaker, let me give you some of the figures, and especially citing government figures itself. Yes.
Would it be wrong if agriculture contributed 70% of our GDP, real agriculture? Would it not make us develop?
It would be very wrong, Honorable Speaker.
Why?
Because productivity per worker is what makes GDP of a country spur and go up. So if you have so many people engaging in a low level of equilibrium, meaning they are trapped, that you can't go past this ceiling. You're engaging in raw agriculture. So whatever you do as a farmer, 1 acre of land can only give you too much. You cannot scale past that. Because one land is, that piece of land is that piece of land. The other thing, Honorable Speaker, even as I answer you, agriculture is based on something we call decreasing return to scale. The other two, that is manufacturing and tertiary production, are based on something we call increasing return to scale. What does this mean? When you have a piece of land like the size of Kenya, what we do, and we are encouraged to do all the time, is to first till the land where land is fertile. And therefore, production starts at the peak. When you have a piece of land, you don't go you start with where you have red soil. You cultivate that. After you cultivate that, that is when you go to the other parts of the land. What does that mean? As you start agriculture, you start cultivating in areas that require very little input for optimal output. But, Honorable Speaker, as you progress, then you move to areas that need irrigation. Irrigation is an input. It increases cost, Honorable Speaker. So it is diminishing return to scale. But manufacturing and tertiary production is increasing. And therefore, it's much more possible to scale when it comes to manufacturing. It is much more possible to scale when you're talking about tertiary production, and especially in tech. And that is why our economy, Kenya and Africa, must embrace that we have to keep on diminishing the involvement of agriculture in our GDP and hating the others. Again, Honorable Speaker, the produce from agriculture are based on what we call market.
You will add Ndindi 10 seconds, 10 minutes, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for that 1 minute. I was just trying to make a point that, Honorable Speaker, it is important, even as we try to drive and to spur agriculture, it is also important that we grow the other areas. And the point I was making, every produce from agriculture and primary production is trapped in market prices. Because a mango in Kenya, an equivalent mango in Kenya, would cost the same in an equivalent mango in any other market. But when you come to manufacturing and tertiary production, you are able to do what is called differentiation of product. That you can have a car called Mercedes with the same function as a car called Toyota, but one may be priced higher than the other. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, that is why it is important for the economy to also look at the other two, because there is no way an economy grows based on primary production alone. I submit, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Wundo.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Allow me also to join my colleagues in thanking Honorable Tim Wanyonyi, the MP for Westlands, the famous Westlands, and probably the incoming governor of Honorable Speaker, for bringing this subject matter to public debate. Honorable Speaker, we have debated this matter for very many years, since I joined the University of Nairobi, when we started talking about development economics and economic problems of Africa. Honorable Speaker, land is not the physical space per se. It's the rights inherent in the land, it's the economic value in the land, it's the ability to use the land